Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall or planning school dances, she could be found running through the desert trails behind her house, sometimes for hours without stopping. Her father, a retired Marine, had taught her that mental toughness was more important than physical strength, a lesson that would prove invaluable in ways she never imagined. At 24, Sarah stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed just 125 pounds. Her appearance was deceiving. Beneath her small frame lay muscles forged by years of rock climbing, marathon running, and an obsession with pushing her limits. She worked as a physical therapist at a military rehabilitation center in San Diego, helping wounded veterans regain their strength and mobility. Every day, she witnessed the incredible determination of soldiers who refused to give up, even when facing impossible odds. The opportunity that would change her life came through an unexpected conversation with Colonel James Reed, a patient recovering from a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. During one of their therapy sessions, he mentioned the upcoming annual Special Operations Challenge, an elite competition where Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and other Special Forces units tested their skills against each other in grueling physical and mental challenges. "It's not just about strength," Colonel Reed explained as Sarah worked on his injured shoulder. "These tests measure everything: endurance, problem-solving under pressure, teamwork, and pure willpower." The current record has stood for 8 years, set by a SEAL team that completed the course in 14 hours and 37 minutes. Sarah's eyes lit up with curiosity. She had always been fascinated by military training and had often wondered if she could handle the same challenges that these elite warriors faced. "What exactly does the challenge involve? And the new 94 that are get it?" she asked, continuing her work on his rehabilitation exercises. Colonel Reed chuckled, thinking she was just making conversation. 5 phases spread across 48 hours. It starts with a 20-mile ocean swim in full gear, followed by a mountain survival course. Then, urban warfare simulations, tactical problem-solving under extreme stress, and finally, a 30-mile desert march carrying a 60-pound pack. Most teams don't even finish. The physical demands are brutal, but the psychological pressure breaks even more people. As Sarah listened, something stirred inside her. She had always wondered about her true limits, always felt like she was capable of more than anyone realized. Her whole life, people had underestimated her because of her size and gender. Teachers had discouraged her from playing contact sports. Coaches had suggested she stick to activities more suitable for young ladies. Even her own mother worried that her intense training habits were unladylike. But Sarah had never accepted limitations imposed by others. When her high school track coach said she was too small for long-distance running, she trained alone and eventually ran a marathon in under 3 hours. When rock climbing instructors suggested she try easier routes, she spent months perfecting her technique until she could climb walls that challenged men twice her size. "Has a woman ever attempted this challenge?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Colonel Reed paused his exercises and looked at her with surprise. "A woman?" "Sarah, this isn't some weekend warrior competition. These are special operations forces. Men who have trained their entire careers for this level of intensity. The physical requirements alone would be..." He stopped himself, realizing how his words might sound. But Sarah wasn't offended. She was intrigued. "So that's a no then?" "Well, technically there are no rules preventing it," he admitted reluctantly. "But the registration requires sponsorship from an active military unit, and I can't imagine any commanding officer approving such a request. It would be seen as a publicity stunt at best, dangerous at worst." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She researched everything she could find about the Special Operations Challenge, reading accounts from previous participants, and studying the specific requirements of each phase. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that her unique background might actually give her advantages that pure muscle mass couldn't provide. Her experience in physical therapy had taught her how to manage pain and push through physical limitations. Her marathon training had developed extraordinary endurance. Her rock climbing skills had honed her problem-solving abilities under stress. Most importantly, years of being underestimated had given her something that couldn't be trained: an unshakable determination to prove herself. For weeks, Sarah increased her training intensity. She swam in the ocean before dawn, ran mountain trails in the afternoon heat, and practiced tactical scenarios late into the night. She studied military manuals, learned advanced first aid techniques, and even took courses in navigation and survival skills. The breakthrough came when Colonel Reed mentioned her interest to his former unit commander, General Patricia Hayes, one of the few women to reach flag rank in the special operations community. General Hayes was intrigued by the idea of a civilian woman attempting the challenge, and saw it as an opportunity to highlight the capabilities of women in demanding roles. "If she's serious about this," General Hayes told Colonel Reed, "she'll need official sponsorship. I can arrange that, but only if she can prove she belongs there. Set up a preliminary assessment. If she can handle a scaled-down version of the challenge, we'll talk about the real thing." The assessment took place on a foggy Saturday morning at Camp Pendleton. Sarah arrived to find a group of active-duty SEALs who had volunteered to conduct her evaluation. Their skepticism was obvious. Some exchanged amused glances. Others shook their heads openly. These were men who had earned their positions through years of grueling training and combat experience. To them, Sarah looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong place. Lieutenant Commander Mike Torres, the senior SEAL present, tried to be diplomatically discouraging. "Ma'am, I respect your enthusiasm, but this assessment involves live-fire exercises, combat simulations, and physical challenges that could result in serious injury. Are you sure you want to proceed?" Sarah looked around at the doubting faces and felt a familiar fire in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had every time someone suggested she aim lower, try something easier, or accept limitations. "I'm sure," she said simply. The modified assessment began with a 5-mile ocean swim in choppy conditions. Sarah had trained in these same waters for months, and she quickly found her rhythm. While the SEALs swam with powerful strokes that looked effortless, Sarah focused on efficiency and endurance. Her smaller size actually worked to her advantage in the water. She cut through the waves with less resistance and conserved energy for the longer haul. By the time they reached the halfway point, several of the SEALs were surprised to see Sarah keeping pace. Her technique was different, more graceful than powerful, but undeniably effective. Lieutenant Commander Torres, swimming beside her, had to admit he was impressed by her consistency and breathing control. The second phase tested problem-solving under pressure. Participants had to navigate through a complex obstacle course while carrying simulated wounded teammates and solving tactical puzzles. This was where Sarah's medical background and rock climbing experience converged perfectly. She approached each obstacle methodically, using leverage and technique rather than brute force. When faced with carrying a 180-pound wounded mannequin over a 12-foot wall, the SEALs expected her to struggle or fail entirely. Instead, Sarah used a pulley system she improvised from the available equipment, demonstrating not just physical capability but tactical thinking that impressed even the skeptics. The final phase was a 10-mile march through rugged terrain while carrying a 40-pound pack and completing navigation challenges. This was Sarah's element. She had spent countless hours running similar trails, and her body was adapted to sustained effort over long distances. While some of the larger SEALs began to feel the accumulated fatigue, Sarah seemed to find another gear. As they approached the finish line, Lieutenant Commander Torres realized something remarkable had happened. Not only had Sarah completed every element of the assessment, she had done so while demonstrating skills and strategies that none of them had anticipated. Her performance wasn't just adequate, it was genuinely impressive. The debriefing session was unlike anything the SEALs had experienced. Instead of discussing how to gently discourage an overambitious civilian, they found themselves analyzing Sarah's techniques and discussing whether her unconventional approaches might actually work in the full challenge. "I have to admit," said Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, one of the most vocal skeptics at the start. "I didn't expect her to last through the swim, let alone finish everything. She's got something different. Not just physical ability, but mental toughness that's hard to teach." General Hayes, who had observed the entire assessment remotely through cameras and reports, made her decision that evening. Sarah would receive official sponsorship to attempt the Special Operations Challenge. The news spread quickly through the Special Operations community, generating reactions ranging from curiosity to outright disbelief. Some saw it as a groundbreaking opportunity to demonstrate that capability transcended traditional expectations. Others worried that it would distract from the serious purpose of the competition or put Sarah in unnecessary danger. The media attention was immediate and intense, with opinions sharply divided along predictable lines. For Sarah, the debates and speculation were just background noise. She had 3 months to prepare for a challenge that would test every aspect of her physical and mental capabilities against the most elite military units in the world. The SEALs who had assessed her were now offering training advice and encouragement. But they were also clear about the reality she would face. The assessment was just a taste, Lieutenant Commander Torres warned her during their final meeting. The real challenge will be exponentially harder. You'll be competing against teams that have trained together for years, on a course designed to break down the strongest and most experienced operators. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Sarah thought about all the times in her life when she had been told something was beyond her capabilities. She thought about the veterans she worked with every day. Men and women who had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. She thought about the little girl who had run through the Texas desert, always believing she could go further than anyone expected. "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied, and meant every word. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge not just Sarah's limits, but fundamental assumptions about human potential and the nature of elite performance. In 3 months, she would stand alongside teams of special operations warriors and attempt to do something that no woman had ever tried before. The SEALs who had initially laughed at her request were no longer laughing. They had seen enough to know that Sarah Martinez was not someone to underestimate. What none of them could predict was just how dramatically she was about to reshape their understanding of what was possible. The 3 months of preparation transformed Sarah Martinez from an accomplished athlete into something approaching a tactical weapon. Every aspect of her training was redesigned with the specific demands of the Special Operations Challenge in mind. She relocated temporarily to a military training facility where she could access specialized equipment and work with advisors who understood the unique requirements she would face. General Hayes had assembled an unofficial support team that included experts from different branches of special operations. Master Sergeant Williams, a former Green Beret survival instructor, taught her advanced techniques for operating in extreme environments. Chief Petty Officer Chen, a Navy SEAL navigation specialist, worked with her on underwater orienteering and tactical swimming. Captain Foster, an Air Force pararescue jumper, helped her refine her medical and rescue skills under pressure. What surprised everyone was how quickly Sarah adapted to military thinking and procedures. Her civilian background, which initially seemed like a disadvantage, actually provided her with fresh perspectives on traditional approaches. She questioned assumptions that military personnel took for granted and often found innovative solutions to tactical problems. "She thinks differently than we do," Master Sergeant Williams observed during one training session. "We've been conditioned to approach problems in certain ways because that's how we were taught. But she comes at everything from a completely different angle. And sometimes that leads to better answers." Sarah's daily routine was punishing by any standard. She woke at 0400 for ocean swimming in conditions that grew progressively more challenging. Cold water, high waves, limited visibility. Each session was designed to replicate the worst possible circumstances she might encounter. Her swimming times improved dramatically, but more importantly, she learned to remain calm and focused even when conditions became genuinely dangerous. Afternoons were devoted to land-based training that combined endurance challenges with tactical problem-solving. She learned to think clearly while exhausted, to make life-or-death decisions while her muscles screamed for rest. The psychological demands were often harder than the physical ones, Military training is designed to break down individual ego and build team cohesion. But Sarah was training alone, preparing to compete as an individual against established teams. The mental preparation proved to be just as important as the physical conditioning. Dr. Amanda Ross, a sports psychologist who worked with elite military units, helped Sarah develop techniques for managing stress and maintaining focus during extended periods of high-intensity performance. The challenge isn't just about completing tasks, Dr. Ross explained during one of their sessions. It's about completing them efficiently while your body is breaking down and your mind is being pushed to its limits. You need to train your brain to function at peak levels even when everything else is failing. Sarah practiced visualization techniques where she mentally rehearsed every aspect of the challenge, including potential disasters and how she would respond to them. She learned breathing methods that could help her maintain composure during panic-inducing situations. Most importantly, she developed an unshakable internal narrative that would sustain her when external circumstances became overwhelming. News of her participation had spread throughout the military community, generating reactions that ranged from supportive to hostile. Some special operations personnel saw her attempt as a positive step toward demonstrating that capability wasn't limited by gender. Others worried that her presence would compromise the integrity of a competition that had always been purely about military excellence. The media attention was relentless and often frustrating. Sarah found herself constantly answering questions about whether she was trying to make a political statement or prove a point about women's capabilities. Her actual motivation, a genuine desire to test her limits against the ultimate challenge, seemed too simple for many journalists to accept. "I'm not representing anyone except myself," she told a particularly persistent reporter. "I'm not trying to prove that all women can do this, or that physical standards should be changed, or that the military needs to be restructured. I'm just trying to see how far I can push my own capabilities. If that inspires other people, great. If it doesn't, that's fine too." The other participants in the challenge were a mixture of active duty and recently retired special operations personnel. Team Alpha consisted of 4 Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6, led by Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, the same officer whose team held the current record. Team Bravo was composed of Green Berets from the 1st Special Forces Group, known for their expertise in unconventional warfare. Team Charlie represented Air Force Special Operations, with pararescue jumpers and combat controllers who specialized in the most dangerous rescue missions. Each team had years of experience working together and intimate knowledge of how to support each other during extreme challenges. They understood each other's strengths and weaknesses, had developed efficient communication systems, and could function as a single unit even under the most stressful conditions. Sarah would be competing as Team Delta, a team of 1. The rules had been modified slightly to account for her solo participation. Where other teams could divide certain tasks among multiple members, Sarah would have to complete everything herself. In some ways, this was a disadvantage, but in others, it was actually beneficial. She wouldn't have to coordinate with anyone or adjust her pace to accommodate teammates who might be struggling. 1 week before the challenge, Sarah participated in a final assessment that would determine her readiness. This evaluation was conducted by Colonel Martinez, no relation, a legendary special operations officer who had helped design the original challenge format. He was known for his brutally honest assessments and his ability to identify weaknesses that could prove fatal under extreme stress. The assessment began before dawn with a simulated hostage rescue scenario. Sarah had to swim 2 miles to a target location, infiltrate a compound using stealth techniques, locate and rescue 3 mannequins representing hostages, and escape while being pursued by opposing forces using paintball weapons. What impressed Colonel Martinez wasn't just that Sarah completed the scenario successfully, but how she approached it. Instead of trying to overpower the opposition or outrun them through superior speed, she used patience and intelligence. She studied the patrol patterns, identified gaps in coverage, and moved through the compound like a ghost. "Most people try to rush these scenarios," he observed afterward. "They think faster is better, but faster is usually just sloppier." She took her time, made good decisions, and executed flawlessly. That's the kind of thinking that wins competitions like this. The second phase tested her technical skills under pressure. She had to navigate through a series of complex puzzles while suspended from a rope system 40 feet above the ground, with time penalties for any mistakes. This combined elements of the mental challenge phases with the physical demands of technical climbing. Sarah's rock climbing background made the physical aspects relatively easy, but the mental components required intense concentration while fighting fatigue and height-induced stress. She worked through each puzzle methodically, double-checking her solutions before moving to the next station. Her time was respectable, but more importantly, she made 0 errors. The final assessment phase was pure endurance. A 20-mile forced march through mountainous terrain while carrying a 70-pound pack and stopping at regular intervals to complete physical challenges. This was designed to simulate the accumulated fatigue that participants would experience during the actual challenge. By mile 15, Sarah was operating on pure determination. Her legs felt like lead, her shoulders ached from the pack weight, and every step required conscious effort, but her mind remained clear and focused. She had learned to separate physical discomfort from actual inability, to distinguish between pain that indicated injury and pain that simply indicated effort. Colonel Martinez followed her progress using GPS tracking and remote cameras. He watched her technique deteriorate as fatigue set in, but he also observed something more important. Her pace never slowed. Even as her form became less efficient, her forward progress remained constant. She was demonstrating the kind of mental toughness that couldn't be taught or faked. When she finally reached the finish line, Sarah collapsed briefly but immediately forced herself to stand and report her status. This wasn't showmanship. It was the kind of discipline that distinguished elite performers from everyone else. Even in exhaustion, she maintained the standards and protocols that would be expected during the actual challenge. Colonel Martinez's final assessment was unequivocal. She's ready. I've seen special operations personnel fail assessments that she just passed. Whatever happens during the real challenge, it won't be because she wasn't prepared. The night before the challenge, Sarah spent several hours alone, mentally rehearsing everything she had learned and trained for. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small-town girl who refused to accept limitations, to a woman preparing to compete against the world's most elite military units. She also thought about the weight of expectations that had accumulated around her participation. Some people saw her as a symbol of progress and capability. Others viewed her as an intruder in a sacred space that should remain exclusively male. Both perspectives missed the point. As far as Sarah was concerned, she wasn't representing anyone except herself. And she wasn't trying to prove anything except her own potential. What she did understand was that her performance would be scrutinized and analyzed in ways that the other participants would never experience. Every mistake would be magnified. Every success would be questioned or diminished. The pressure was enormous. But it was also familiar. She had been dealing with skepticism and low expectations her entire life. The other teams were confident and relaxed, sharing meals and war stories, discussing strategy and joking about previous challenges. They had been through similar competitions before and knew what to expect. For them, this was serious but familiar territory. Sarah ate alone, reviewing her notes and running through visualization exercises. She wasn't being antisocial. She simply needed to maintain the mental state that would carry her through the next 48 hours. Some observers interpreted her solitude as nervousness or intimidation. But those who knew her recognized it as focus. At 2,200 hours, all participants attended a final briefing, where officials reviewed the challenge rules, safety protocols, and scoring systems. The atmosphere was professional, but tense. Everyone understood that they were about to embark on something that would test them in ways that few humans ever experienced. Lieutenant Commander Webb, leader of the record-holding team, approached Sarah after the briefing. His manner was respectful but serious. "I want you to know that my team is going to compete at our absolute maximum level," he said. "We won't hold back or go easy because you're here." This challenge is too important for that. Sarah appreciated his directness. I wouldn't want it any other way, she replied. I didn't come here for special treatment. I came here to compete. He nodded and extended his hand. Then, may the best team win. As Sarah returned to her quarters for a few hours of rest before the 0400 start time, she felt a sense of calm that surprised her. She had done everything possible to prepare for this moment. Her body was as strong and conditioned as it had ever been. Her mind was sharp and focused. Her equipment was checked and ready. Tomorrow would determine whether 3 months of grueling preparation and a lifetime of refusing to accept limitations would be enough to achieve something that no woman had ever attempted. The SEALs who had initially laughed at her request were no longer laughing. They had seen enough of her capabilities to know that she belonged in this competition. What none of them knew was that Sarah Martinez was about to redefine their understanding of what was possible in elite human performance. The record, that had stood for 8 years, was about to face its most unexpected challenger. The alarm sounded at 0330, though Sarah had been awake for 20 minutes already. Her internal clock had adjusted to military precision during her months of preparation, and she never needed to be dragged from sleep on important days. She moved through her pre-challenge routine with mechanical precision. Light breakfast, equipment check, mental preparation exercises. At 0400 hours, all participants assembled on the beach at Camp Pendleton for the opening ceremony. The ocean was rough, with 6-foot swells and water temperature barely above 50 degrees. Visibility was limited by pre-dawn darkness and coastal fog. These were exactly the kind of challenging conditions that would separate elite performers from everyone else. General Hayes delivered brief opening remarks that emphasized safety protocols and reminded everyone that the challenge was designed to test limits, not destroy careers. She made a point of acknowledging Sarah's participation without making it seem unusual or extraordinary, a gesture that Sarah appreciated more than any dramatic statement of support. The first phase was the 20-mile ocean swim that had intimidated Sarah more than any other component. She would be wearing the same 40-pound gear pack as the teams, plus additional navigation equipment since she wouldn't have teammates to share the load. The route followed the coastline but included several open water segments where participants would be completely alone in the Pacific. Lieutenant Commander Webb's Team Alpha entered the water first, moving with the synchronized efficiency of operators who had worked together for years. The Green Berets of Team Bravo followed, their technique slightly different but equally impressive. Air Force Team Charlie displayed their own variation of elite swimming, adapted for their specific mission requirements. Sarah was the last to enter the water, both by design and preference. She wanted to establish her own rhythm without being influenced by the other team's pacing strategies. As she waded into the surf, she could hear scattered comments from the observation teams and media personnel who had gathered to witness the start. The first mile was pure misery. The water was shockingly cold, even with her wetsuit, and the heavy pack made every stroke require maximum effort. Her goggles fogged repeatedly, forcing her to stop periodically to clear her vision. The other teams had pulled ahead and were barely visible in the distance, but Sarah had learned during her months of training that the first phase of any endurance challenge was always about surviving long enough to find her optimal performance zone. She forced herself to stay calm, maintain steady breathing, and trust that her conditioning would carry her through the initial struggle. By mile 3, something remarkable happened. Her body temperature had stabilized, her stroke rhythm had locked into an efficient pattern, and she was moving through the water with the fluid grace that had impressed even skeptical SEALs during her assessment. The heavy pack, which had felt like a crushing burden at the start, now felt like a natural part of her body. More significantly, she began gaining ground on the other teams. Team Alpha maintained their lead but seemed to be working harder than Sarah expected for this early in the challenge. Team Bravo was struggling slightly with navigation in the poor visibility. Team Charlie appeared to be pacing themselves conservatively, possibly saving energy for later phases. Sarah's smaller size, which everyone assumed would be a disadvantage in open water, actually proved beneficial in the rough conditions. She cut through the waves with less resistance than the larger operators, and her superior technique allowed her to maintain speed while conserving energy. At the 10-mile checkpoint, race officials were surprised to see Sarah arrive only minutes behind the leading teams. Her split time was well ahead of projections, and she showed no signs of the fatigue that was becoming visible in some of the other participants. "How are you feeling?" asked Dr. Martinez, one of the medical observers stationed at the checkpoint. "Strong," Sarah replied simply, adjusting her navigation equipment and preparing to continue. She had learned during training that long conversations during brief rest stops were a waste of precious mental energy. The second half of the swim included the most challenging segment, a 5-mile stretch of open ocean where participants would be completely out of sight of land. This was where teams typically experienced their first serious problems, and where psychological pressure often became more difficult than physical demands. Sarah had specifically prepared for this section by practicing in similarly isolated conditions. She understood that the fear and disorientation that many people experienced in open water could be overcome through mental discipline and trust in her preparation. As she swam through the deep Pacific swells, alone except for distant safety boats, Sarah felt a sense of profound calm. This was exactly what she had trained for. The moment when everything except forward progress became irrelevant. She existed in a bubble of focused determination, aware only of her stroke rhythm, breathing pattern, and navigation heading. At the 15-mile mark, she made visual contact with Team Charlie, who had been maintaining a steady pace ahead of her. The Air Force operators were clearly surprised to see her gaining ground, and their stroke rate increased noticeably as they realized she was becoming a competitive factor. By mile 18, Sarah had overtaken Team Charlie entirely. She was now in third place overall, behind only the SEALs and Green Berets, who had seemed untouchable at the start. Her split times indicated that she was not only competing effectively, but actually running ahead of the pace needed to break the existing record. The final 2 miles tested every aspect of her preparation. The accumulated fatigue from 4 hours of intense swimming was combining with the psychological pressure of knowing that her performance was being watched by hundreds of observers, both on site and through remote monitoring systems. Team Bravo, the Green Berets, began showing signs of serious strain. Their formation became ragged, and one team member was clearly struggling to maintain the required pace. Team Alpha, the record holders, were still leading but had lost the relaxed efficiency they had displayed earlier. Sarah, swimming alone but maintaining perfect form, continued to close the gap. She caught Team Bravo with half a mile remaining and passed them as if they were standing still. Her stroke rate had actually increased over the final miles, a demonstration of conditioning that amazed the observers who had been tracking her progress. With 200 yards to go, only Team Alpha remained ahead of her. Lieutenant Commander Webb and his SEALs were fighting to maintain their lead, but they were clearly operating at their maximum capacity. Sarah, incredibly, appeared to have found another gear entirely. She pulled alongside Team Alpha just 50 yards from the beach. For 30 seconds, the most elite naval warriors in the world found themselves swimming stroke for stroke with a civilian woman who wasn't supposed to be able to compete at their level. Sarah touched the beach marker exactly 17 seconds behind Team Alpha, completing the 20-mile ocean swim in a time that would have been competitive in any previous year of the challenge. More importantly, she had proven that her unconventional approach could hold its own against the most elite military swimmers in the world. The transition to Phase 2, the mountain survival course, happened immediately. Participants had exactly 10 minutes to change gear, consume nutrition supplements, and begin the 12-mile mountain trek that included technical climbing, navigation challenges, and wilderness survival tasks. This phase favored Sarah's background more directly. Her years of rock climbing and trail running had prepared her for exactly this type of terrain and challenge combination. While the military teams were adapting their training to civilian outdoor skills, Sarah was operating in her natural environment. The course wound through some of the most difficult terrain in Southern California, including sections that required advanced climbing techniques and others where navigation errors could add hours to completion times. Each team had to locate and complete tasks at 6 different checkpoints, with penalties for missed objectives or safety violations. Sarah established a significant lead within the first 2 miles. Her climbing technique was superior to any of the military participants, and her navigation skills allowed her to identify efficient routes that the other teams missed entirely. More importantly, she was operating at a sustainable pace while the other teams were still recovering from the demanding swim phase. At checkpoint 3, she encountered her first serious obstacle. A technical climbing section required specific equipment usage that she had practiced but never mastered to the level of military personnel who used similar techniques regularly in combat situations. The task involved ascending a 60-foot cliff face while carrying additional equipment, then setting up a rope system for rappelling down the opposite side. This was where her months of military training proved crucial. Instead of relying solely on her civilian climbing experience, she applied the systematic approach and safety protocols she had learned from special operations instructors. Her technique was textbook perfect, and her execution was flawless. When Team Alpha arrived at the same checkpoint 20 minutes later, they found the rope system that Sarah had rigged still in place. Lieutenant Commander Webb examined her setup and was forced to admit that it was not only functional, but actually demonstrated superior technique to what his own team typically employed. "She's not just keeping up," he told his teammates. "She's setting a pace that we're struggling to match." The middle sections of the mountain course favored the military team's superior physical conditioning and tactical training. Tasks involving combat simulation, weapons handling, and team coordination played to their strengths while highlighting Sarah's relative inexperience in military-specific skills. But Sarah had anticipated these challenges and developed strategies that compensated for her tactical limitations. Where the teams used firepower and aggression to overcome obstacles, she employed stealth and patience. Where they relied on team coordination, she used superior individual preparation and planning. The psychological pressure was beginning to affect all participants. 6 hours into a 48-hour challenge, with their bodies already pushed to near exhaustion levels, the military teams were discovering that their usual performance levels were not sustainable for this duration. Sarah, however, seemed to be hitting her stride. Her conditioning was specifically designed for extended challenges, and her mental preparation had focused on maintaining performance over long periods rather than achieving brief peaks of excellence. At checkpoint 5, a navigation and survival task that required locating resources and building shelter using only natural materials, Sarah demonstrated skills that surprised even her military advisors. Her solution was creative, efficient, and showed a level of outdoor expertise that complemented her physical capabilities perfectly. Team Charlie, the Air Force operators, encountered serious problems at this checkpoint. One team member was showing signs of heat exhaustion, and their navigation had been off target for the previous 2 miles. They were forced to request medical evaluation, which resulted in time penalties that effectively eliminated them from record contention. Team Bravo, the Green Berets, was also struggling. The accumulated fatigue from the ocean, swim, and mountain climbing was affecting their decision-making abilities, and they had made several tactical errors that cost valuable time. Only Team Alpha and Sarah remained in competition for the record. The final phase of the mountain course required participants to complete a night navigation exercise followed by a simulated rescue operation. This combined the technical skills of mountain rescue with the tactical challenges of operating in hostile territory under cover of darkness. Sarah had specifically trained for night operations, knowing that her smaller size and civilian background might actually provide advantages in stealth-based scenarios. She moved through the darkness with confidence, using techniques that combined military training with her own outdoor experience. The rescue simulation required locating and evacuating 3 wounded personnel from a simulated crash site while avoiding detection by opposing forces. Sarah's approach was methodical and patient. She spent extra time conducting reconnaissance, planned multiple evacuation routes, and executed the mission with textbook precision. Team Alpha, operating under pressure to maintain their lead, made aggressive choices that resulted in early detection and time penalties. Their superior firepower and tactical skills couldn't overcome the strategic errors caused by fatigue and time pressure. When Phase 2 concluded after 14 hours of competition, Sarah had taken the overall lead for the first time. Her combined times for both phases were not only competitive with the record pace, they were significantly ahead of it. The Special Operations Challenge was far from over. 2 more phases remained. including urban warfare simulations and a final desert march that would test the limits of human endurance. But something fundamental had changed in the dynamic of the competition. The woman who had been dismissed as an interested amateur was now setting the pace that elite military units were struggling to match. The SEALs who had laughed at her initial request were no longer laughing. They were wondering if they were about to witness something unprecedented in the history of special operations competition. Lieutenant Commander Webb gathered his team during the brief rest period between phases. His message was direct and sobering. She's not just competing anymore. She's winning. If we want to keep our record, we need to find a level of performance that none of us have ever reached before. Sarah, resting alone but alert, understood that the most difficult challenges still lay ahead. Urban warfare and desert survival would test different aspects of her preparation, and the accumulated fatigue of 18 hours of intense competition was beginning to affect even her exceptional conditioning. But she also understood that something extraordinary was happening. She was not just surviving a challenge designed to break elite military personnel. She was excelling at it in ways that were forcing everyone to reconsider their assumptions about human potential and performance. The record that had stood for 8 years was no longer a distant goal. It was a target that she was on pace not just to reach, but to shatter completely. The question was no longer whether a civilian woman could compete with special operations warriors. The question was whether those warriors could find a way to compete with her.